Right, so let's make no bones about it. Labour had a thumping win in the Rutherglen and Hamiton West by-election yesterday. But actually, when you drill down through all the media noise about what this might mean, the pollsters saying Labour will win back Scotland from the SNP on these numbers, this victory has no solid foundations, given the win actually had nothing to do with Starmer, nothing to do with Labour. Yes, there is this huge swing, but based on what? The party of Keir Starmer and Sarwar contributed nothing, in fact, towards this win. They're simply the beneficiaries of a variety of other issues affecting other parties. As such, any talk of a general election victory extrapolated from this one result will be built on similarly rocky foundations, no matter what the mainstream talking heads might say. Right, so first things first, there's no avoiding it. Labour won the Rutherglen and Hamiton West by-election emphatically on a 20.4% swing from the SNP to Labour. And given how closely contested the seat has been in recent years, that headline figure is hard to ignore. And needless to say, the mainstream media certainly are not ignoring it, falling over themselves to say what would happen if this was rolled out across the whole of Scotland. An opportunity to mock the SNP, I suppose, as they appear to cheer the fact that on these figures, if rolled out across the whole of Scotland, Labour would end up at the next general election with 38 or 39 Scottish seats, with the SNP reduced to just 6 or 7. Depends on which outlet you happen to be looking at, depends on which analyses they've used. Starmer's Labour, together with its Scottish branch office, would be the biggest party north of the border. The trouble is, this is one set of stats, though, here and now, which may not carry out to whenever the next general election comes, because we don't know when that's going to be. So although this is as accurate a poll as you can possibly have, it really does only relate to Rutherglen and Hamiton West, not the whole of Scotland, and it only applies as a snapshot at this moment in time. And I also say that because there are a multitude of different reasons behind why Labour actually won, and here in this constituency specifically. But their own conduct, their own actions, their own policies certainly aren't one of them. We have a Labour Party right now that's committed to keeping child poverty, that's committed to leaving the disabled without the representation they've been promised, that is, as a leadership that is taking donations from private health, flipping the bird in effect to saving the NHS. You cannot trust our health service with Labour anymore, the party that created it. They're referring to migrant families as terrorists. Explain to me exactly how all of this isn't the sort of thing Sunak would actually put forward. But as I said in a video yesterday, it doesn't appear to be an issue how badly politicians lie anymore, because when they're all doing it, lying no longer ends up mattering anymore. It's just about who shouts loudest and shrillest and who seems to say the daftest, most unbelievable things now. Put it this way, even Professor John Curtis has commented, saying one thing this by-election clearly wasn't down to was Labour policy, when that's exactly what it always should be about. So let's do some analysis of our own, if that's the case. What are the real reasons for this Labour win? Well, let's start with the SNP. They are in all manner of trouble nationally in Scotland, but their name is particularly muddy in Rutherglen and Hamiton West. The by-election was triggered, after all, in order to remove the former SNP MP, who had been squatting unwanted there as an independent, Margaret Ferrier, following her being found criminally culpable in breaching COVID-19 guidelines in September 2020. A recall petition was eventually signed following her suspension from Parliament over the affair, and after she'd refused to resign upon the request of the then SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon, and again refused to resign when she was asked to by her constituency association, therefore both insulting her own party and her own constituents, you can see the enormous damage she's done to her party's reputation there, in a seat she was holding with a majority of just over 5,000. More nationally, there have been issues with the SNP too, though. Nicola Sturgeon's departure as First Minister and the subsequent ongoing investigation into misappropriation of SNP funds spelled the end of an era for the SNP in a way, and her successor Humza Yousaf has failed to recover the party's reputation thus far, not least of which in Rutherglen and Hamiton West, where their reputation is pretty much as grim as it gets. So the main opposition to a Labour victory was, by and large, when you look at this in that context, removed. And bear in mind, as I said a moment ago, this seat regularly switches hands. Ferrier was first elected in 2015 when Ed Miliband's Labour lost Scotland. But 2 years later, it was one of the seats Jeremy Corbyn won back in 2017, only for it to be lost again thanks to Starmer and the Labour right sabotage of the general election in 2019, ensuring the Tories won that election. But as long as they got rid of Corbyn, it was worth it, it would seem. But the SNP and its problems aren't the whole story here either. The Tories completely collapsed. Now, given their conference has just ended, typically political parties get a bit of a boost after such events, but Sunak hasn't gained anything at all. If anything, he lost ground afterwards. And in Rutherglen and Hamiton West, the Tories lost so much ground that they lost their deposit with it. You lose your deposit if you get less than 5% of the vote. The Tories won just 3.9% of the vote. They lost over 11% of their vote share. That's enormous, and if that were extrapolated across the country, well, they'd be reduced to a rump. It's not a seat the Tories have ever won, though, this. They've never got more than 20% of the vote there, and that was when Labour collapsed in 2015, following Ed Miliband, sharing a platform with David Cameron to oppose Scottish independence. Some tactical voting, and indeed that also played its part here, handing a bloody nose to the Tories and the SNP, both of whom are reputationally damaged, is something that we can readily say on the back of these results. People may have turned out to vote for Labour as a tactical option, perhaps, but turnout itself is a factor here. The turnout was just 37.2%, a little over half of those that turned out for the 2019 general election, for instance. And even by election standards, that's rough. To put that in perspective, we recently had 3 other by-elections in one day, didn't we? With the turnout in Uxbridge being 46%, Selby and Ainsty 45%, and Somerton and Frome was 44%. If people were turning out for Labour, enthused by them, and given they increased their vote share by 24% over the 2019 election results, how come the actual number of people who voted for them went down then? 17,845 people voted for Michael Shanks. Labour had more votes here in 2015 when the party lost Scotland than it got last night. So if that's tactically voting for Labour, well, a lot of former Labour voters must have stayed at home then. Same can be said of SNP and Tory voters, though. A lot of people from across the political party spectrum, across the board, it would appear, chose to stay at home. Of course, the Tories have been suffering in Scotland for more reasons than just Sunak having a rubbish conference, because like the SNP, they are also poorly regarded right now. Partygate did the Tories no favour anywhere. Boris Johnson being caught cheating the COVID rules on an even greater scale than the deposed Margaret Ferrier did. So if the SNP were to suffer because of her, perhaps it's no surprise the Tories did so badly that they lost their deposit. From Labour's perspective, they did, as usual, throw the kitchen sink at this by-election. Not something they could do during a full general election campaign, with shadow ministers door-knocking, pressing the flesh and desperate to do well, but with Starmer once again imposing a candidate of his sort, of his choosing, and nothing quite says vote Labour like a guy who chose to vote for someone else rather than support the party when it was led by Corbyn. He voted elsewhere during the 2019 election. And when it actually stood for some stuff, but he's welcomed back. He became a candidate. Being anti-Corbyn is worthy of promotion these days, apparently. Says a lot for what room and what representation there is for the left under this regime. It's no surprise they may not have turned out to vote for Labour last night. Functionally, though, Labour had nothing to sell but snake oil on the doorstep. You can't vote for policy with Labour because they refuse to have any. And any announcements they do make inevitably get you turned on. It's not a party that you can trust. But that was a moot point yesterday. The SNP deserved a bloody nose, according to Rutherglen and Hamiton West, as did the Tories. Turnout was down, Labour's vote share went up, but number of votes was down. Apathy was the biggest winner on the night, but it's given Labour much to cheer about publicly, though privately, if they're drinking their own Kool-Aid, they should wake up to the fact they won because of other parties being more disliked than they are, not because of anything they actually stand for. What do you reckon, though? Fair analysis or not? Sour grapes interpretation of a rotten lefty, or are the warning signs there for Labour to take note of? Let me know your thoughts on the vid on the by-election. Is there any other factors I haven't thought of that count for something here, do you think? Do let me know in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where one person who is solidly onto the dishonesty and populist weather vane positioning of Keir Starmer is the SNP's Westminster spokesman Stephen Flynn. He knows how to dish it out to Starmer as well as the Tories, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.